What happens if the world's most powerful nation suddenly loses its grip? For nearly a century, the United States has been the center of global influence, controlling trade routes, shaping financial systems, dominating technology, and setting the rules of international order. But history has one undeniable pattern. No empire stays at the top forever. So the real question isn't just whether the US can fall, it's what comes after it. Will China step into the vacuum with its manufacturing empire and technological ambitions? Will India rise with its massive population and digital revolution? Or will the world fragment into multiple competing powers, each controlling different pieces of global influence? And more importantly, what does this shift mean for money, war, technology, and everyday life across the planet? Because when a superpower declines, it doesn't just lose influence, it reshapes the entire structure of global reality. And the answer to who rises next might not be as simple as choosing a single country. If the United States were to experience a structural decline in its global power, the consequences would reshape the entire international system. For nearly a century, the U.S. has functioned as the central pillar of global finance, military security, and technological innovation. A failure of that system would not create a simple replacement superpower, but rather a fragmented competition among rising and established states. The question, therefore, is not just who replaces America, but what kind of world emerges after it. Historically, power transitions rarely occur smoothly. The decline of one dominant state often produces instability, economic shocks, and regional rivalries. If the U.S. loses its ability to project power, global alliances like NATO could weaken, trade routes may fragment, and the dollar might lose its status as the world reserve currency. This would open space for multiple contenders rather than a single successor. The most frequently discussed candidates include China, India, the European Union, and potentially a coalition-based global order. However, each of these actors faces structural limitations. China has economic scale but demographic decline. India has population momentum but infrastructure gaps. Europe has technological strength but political fragmentation. Therefore, the post-American world is more likely to be multipolar than unipolar. In such a system, influence is distributed across regions with shifting alliances rather than permanent dominance. Military power alone would no longer guarantee leadership. Economic integration, technological control, and energy independence would become the primary tools of influence. The collapse of U.S. dominance would also accelerate regional blocs. Asia could consolidate around China and India. Europe might strengthen internal unity to protect its interests. Africa and Latin America could gain greater autonomy in resource negotiations. In this environment, power becomes fluid rather than fixed. The end of American dominance does not guarantee a single winner, but instead signals the beginning of competitive global evolution. This transition would redefine international institutions and global governance. Organizations like the United Nations may lose coherence without strong American leadership. New financial systems could emerge centered on regional currencies or digital alternatives. Technological competition would intensify, especially in artificial intelligence, semiconductor production, and space exploration. Whoever leads these domains will shape the next global order. Yet no single country currently holds an uncontested advantage across all sectors. This reality suggests that the future will be defined not by replacement of the U.S., but by redistribution of power among several centers of influence, competing and cooperating simultaneously in a complex global system shaped by economics, technology, and shifting alliances, rather than singular dominance or empire control as seen in previous historical eras across centuries of global development. The outcome will depend on adaptability of states and their ability to innovate under pressure while maintaining internal stability and external partnerships that sustain long-term influence in an increasingly uncertain world order where power is continuously contested and redefined by emerging forces and global transformations driven by shifting demographics, economic realignments, and rapid technological disruption across continents in the coming decades ahead globally, unfolding. In the event of a United States decline, global attention immediately shifts toward the major power centers capable of filling the strategic and economic vacuum. Among these contenders, three stand out as the most influential in shaping the post-American order: China, India, and the European Union. Each represents a different model of global power with distinct strengths and weaknesses. China is often viewed as the most direct challenger due to its massive industrial base, state-driven economic system, and rapid technological advancement. Over the past few decades, it has transformed itself into a manufacturing superpower and a central node in global supply chains. However, its long-term rise is constrained by demographic decline, high debt levels, and geopolitical tensions with neighboring states. India, on the other hand, represents a different trajectory of rise, driven primarily by population growth, democratic governance, and expanding digital infrastructure. With one of the youngest populations in the world, India has the potential to become a major labor and innovation hub. Yet, it still faces significant challenges, including inequality, infrastructural deficits, and bureaucratic inefficiencies that limit its global competitiveness. The European Union presents a third model, characterized by advanced economies and strong regulatory frameworks. Europe excels in high-end manufacturing, scientific research, and soft power influence through culture and diplomacy. However, its fragmented political structure makes unified global leadership difficult. Member states often pursue divergent national interests, limiting the bloc's ability to act decisively on the world stage. Beyond these three, other regions also play important roles. Russia, while militarily powerful, faces economic constraints. Brazil and other Latin American nations hold resource wealth, but lack global coordination. African countries are experiencing rapid demographic expansion, but remain early in industrial development. These dynamics suggest that no single country is positioned to replicate the comprehensive dominance once held by the United States. Instead, global power is likely to disperse across multiple overlapping spheres of influence. Economic interdependence will continue to tie nations together, but strategic competition will intensify in key sectors such as energy, technology, and finance. Countries that control critical supply chains or digital infrastructure will gain disproportionate influence regardless of traditional military strength. In this environment, alliances become flexible and transactional rather than permanent. The rise of regional blocs will accelerate as states seek security and economic stability outside of a single hegemonic structure. Asia may consolidate around competing poles led by China and India, while Europe strengthens internal integration to preserve global relevance. The Middle East will continue to leverage energy resources as a strategic bargaining tool in global negotiations. Africa could emerge as a key growth frontier if infrastructure and governance systems improve significantly. The decisive factor in determining which nations rise will be their ability to adapt to technological disruption, climate pressures, and shifting global trade patterns in the decades ahead, as uncertainty becomes the defining feature of international relations and economic competition intensifies across all regions simultaneously, without a single dominant stabilizing power guiding the system toward equilibrium in realignment phases. China represents the most significant and complex variable in any scenario involving the decline of United States global dominance. Its rise over the past 4 decades has been unprecedented in scale and speed, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and transforming it into the world's second-largest economy. Central to China's strength is its industrial capacity, which dominates global manufacturing networks across electronics, textiles, machinery, and increasingly advanced technologies. The Belt and Road Initiative has extended its economic influence across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe, creating infrastructure linkages that reinforce trade dependency. However, China's trajectory is not without constraints. Its population is aging rapidly, reducing long-term labor force growth and increasing social welfare burdens. Environmental degradation and resource scarcity also pose structural challenges to sustained expansion. Additionally, geopolitical tensions with the United States and neighboring countries create persistent strategic pressure. In technological competition, China has made significant progress in artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and renewable energy systems. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba illustrate the country's ability to compete globally in digital ecosystems. Yet it still relies heavily on foreign semiconductor technology, which represents a critical vulnerability. China's political system allows for rapid centralized decision-making, enabling large-scale infrastructure and industrial projects to be executed quickly. This efficiency is a key advantage in global competition, especially when compared to slower democratic systems. However, this same system can produce rigidity and limit innovation at the grassroots level. Economically, China is transitioning from export-driven growth to domestic consumption and high-technology industries. This transition is essential for long-term stability, but introduces short-term volatility in growth rates. The property sector slowdown has further exposed vulnerabilities in local government finances and financial markets. Militarily, China has expanded its capabilities in the South China Sea and modernized its armed forces to project regional power. Its navy is now the largest in the world by number of vessels, signaling a shift toward maritime influence. Yet, despite these strengths, China faces a strategic ceiling in global leadership due to alliance limitations. Unlike the United States, it has fewer formal military alliances, which reduces its global influence network. Internationally, perceptions of China's rise are mixed, with some countries viewing it as an economic opportunity and others as a strategic threat. This duality complicates its ability to build stable, long-term partnerships across regions. The future of China's global role will depend heavily on its ability to balance economic growth, political control, and international integration without triggering systemic resistance from other major powers and regional coalitions. If successful, China could anchor a new Eurasian-centered economic order that competes with Western systems, but would still fall short of universal dominance due to structural and geopolitical constraints that limit its expansion beyond regional influence zones in a fragmented, multipolar world shaped by competing centers of power and shifting alliances across continents, over time ultimately defined by adaptive resilience and strategic economic coordination among rising powers globally in the evolving international system over coming decades ahead globally. India represents one of the most dynamic potential growth stories in the post-American global order. With a population surpassing all other nations, India has a demographic advantage that could translate into long-term economic and strategic influence. Unlike China, India maintains a democratic political system, which gives it a different form of global legitimacy and soft power appeal. Its economy is diversified across services, technology, agriculture, and manufacturing, with strong performance in information technology and digital services. Cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, and Delhi have become major hubs for innovation and entrepreneurship. However, India's rise is constrained by infrastructure gaps, uneven development, and regulatory complexity. Large portions of the population still lack access to consistent healthcare, education, and modern transportation systems. These structural challenges limit the speed at which India can convert demographic advantage into global dominance. In the technology sector, India has become a global leader in software development, outsourcing, and digital innovation. Its IT industry serves major corporations worldwide and contributes significantly to foreign exchange earnings. Government initiatives such as Digital India and Make in India aim to strengthen domestic manufacturing and expand technological capacity. These programs are designed to reduce dependence on imports and increase India's integration into global value chains. Geopolitically, India occupies a strategic position between major power blocs, allowing it to maintain flexible diplomatic relationships with both Western countries and Asian neighbors. This strategic autonomy enhances its influence in global negotiations and multilateral institutions. India's participation in organizations like BRICS and the Quad reflects its balancing act between competing global interests. This dual alignment strategy allows it to maximize economic opportunities while maintaining strategic independence. Despite its potential, India must overcome significant challenges in governance, education, and infrastructure to fully realize its global ambitions. Income inequality and regional disparities remain persistent obstacles to cohesive national development. Climate change also poses a major risk to India's long-term growth, given its vulnerability to extreme weather events and water scarcity. Addressing these issues will be critical for sustaining economic expansion and social stability. If India successfully implements structural reforms, it could emerge as a major pole in a multipolar world, balancing the influence of China and Western powers. Its large youth population provides both a labor force advantage and a growing consumer market that can drive internal economic expansion. In the long term, India's rise will depend on its ability to integrate technological innovation, institutional reform, and global partnerships into a coherent development strategy. If successful, India could become a central stabilizing force in Asia, contributing to a more balanced and diversified global power structure. However, its trajectory remains contingent on sustained economic growth, political cohesion, and effective management of internal diversity across regions and cultures. The next decades will determine whether India transitions from potential to power on the global stage through consistent reform and strategic positioning within emerging international systems shaped by competition and cooperation among major states, driven by innovation, demographics, and global strategic realignment over time in the international system shift toward multipolar balance globally. In the absence of a single dominant superpower, the global system evolves into a multipolar structure, characterized by distributed influence and competing regional blocs. This transformation fundamentally changes how power is exercised and maintained across international borders. Instead of one hegemon dictating global norms, multiple centers of power negotiate and compete within overlapping spheres of influence. Economic interdependence remains a key stabilizing factor, but it is increasingly accompanied by strategic rivalry in technology, energy, and security. Supply chains become politicized as nations seek to reduce dependency on rival powers. This leads to fragmentation in global trade networks and the emergence of regional economic zones. Military alliances also become more fluid, with countries shifting partnerships based on immediate strategic interests rather than long-standing ideological alignments. Technology becomes the central battleground of global competition. Nations that dominate artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and semiconductor production gain disproportionate influence over economic and military systems. Data control and digital infrastructure become as important as traditional territorial control in shaping global power dynamics. Energy transitions further complicate the global order as countries compete for dominance in renewable technologies and critical mineral supply chains. Climate change acts as a force multiplier of geopolitical instability, creating new migration patterns and resource conflicts across regions. In this environment, middle powers gain more leverage by balancing relationships between larger rival states. Countries such as Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, and South Africa play increasingly important roles in shaping regional outcomes. International institutions struggle to adapt to this fragmented reality, often lacking enforcement power and consensus among major actors. As a result, global governance becomes more decentralized, with regional organizations taking on greater responsibility for security and economic coordination. Financial systems also diversify, with multiple reserve currencies emerging alongside the US dollar, reducing monetary centralization. Digital currencies and blockchain-based systems further transform global transactions, increasing both efficiency and fragmentation. The rise of regional innovation hubs accelerates competition in science and technology, reducing dependence on traditional Western centers of research. Ultimately, the multipolar world is defined by constant negotiation, shifting alliances, and adaptive strategies rather than fixed hierarchies of power. Stability depends on the ability of major actors to manage competition without escalating into systemic conflict. While rivalry intensifies, cooperation remains necessary in addressing global challenges, such as pandemics, climate change, and financial instability. No single actor can unilaterally solve these issues, reinforcing the interdependent nature of the global system. Power in this era is not absolute, but conditional on adaptability, technological advancement, and diplomatic skill in managing complex international relationships. The future global order will therefore be defined not by dominance of one nation, but by continuous competition and cooperation among many actors across multiple domains of influence and power projection in a constantly evolving geopolitical landscape, shaped by uncertainty and rapid transformation worldwide, driven by technological acceleration, economic fragmentation, and strategic recalibration among global powers in response to shifting geopolitical realities across regions over the coming decades ahead worldwide, without centralized authority/dominance, but increasing complexity in global systems evolution globally. Emerging pattern. The question of which country will rise after a potential United States decline does not have a simple or singular answer. Instead, it reflects a complex restructuring of global power that is already underway. Rather than a direct replacement of American dominance, the world is moving toward a distributed system of influence where multiple actors shape outcomes in different domains. China may lead in industrial and technological scale, India may dominate demographic and service-based growth, and Europe may retain strength in regulatory and institutional frameworks. However, none of these powers is likely to fully replicate the global reach that the United States once held. This reality suggests that the future will be defined less by singular dominance and more by layered competition and interdependence. In such a world, power is measured not only by military strength, but also by control over technology, finance, energy, and information systems. Countries that succeed will be those able to integrate innovation with strategic flexibility and domestic resilience. The rise of artificial intelligence, automation, and digital infrastructure will further reshape global hierarchies, making adaptability the most critical national asset. At the same time, geopolitical fragmentation increases uncertainty, forcing nations to hedge their alliances and diversify their economic dependencies. The absence of a single stabilizing power creates both opportunity and risk, enabling regional powers to expand influence while also increasing the likelihood of localized conflicts. In this environment, global governance becomes more challenging, requiring new frameworks for cooperation that can function without centralized authority. Economic competition intensifies as countries race to secure access to critical resources, emerging markets, and advanced technologies. Yet despite rivalry, interdependence ensures that complete separation is impossible, maintaining a baseline level of global integration. The outcome of this transition will depend on how effectively major powers manage competition while avoiding systemic breakdown. Historical patterns suggest that multipolar systems are often less stable than unipolar ones, but they also allow for greater diversity in political and economic models. This diversity may ultimately produce more resilient global structures, capable of absorbing shocks and adapting to change. The key uncertainty remains whether cooperation can be sustained among competing powers in the absence of a dominant enforcer. If cooperation fails, fragmentation may deepen, leading to regional blocs operating independently with limited global coordination. If cooperation succeeds, however, the world could transition into a balanced multipolar order with managed competition and shared stability. Ultimately, the rise of any country will depend on internal cohesion, technological advancement, economic resilience, and diplomatic effectiveness in navigating a rapidly evolving international landscape. No single nation is guaranteed to dominate the future world order, and the concept of dominance itself may be replaced by distributed leadership across multiple centers of power, interacting dynamically over time in response to technological, economic, and geopolitical shifts, shaping the 21st century global system evolution, driven by accelerating innovation cycles, shifting alliances, and evolving economic interdependence worldwide in a constantly changing geopolitical environment without clear global hierarchy, but rising complexity in systemic transition globally, unfolding reality now emerging.